record in many places. I think by the end of it, I will have 2 or 3 copies of the recording, and Vlad will have a copy of the recording, and there'll be a copy of the recording on YouTube that we could always pull off if we needed to.
Good. You want me to record on my local camera and my audio setup and send you the files? Okay.
Yeah.
Not that high quality.
I mean, I just put it all in Vimeo, and I don't really have to worry about it. I don't have to worry about it, but no.
Just like in the world of controls, you must have backups, right? And
absolutely,
I'm gonna make sure things are
what's good for you.
Nope, perfect. So I see us live on LinkedIn. I'm gonna let Vlad check kind of all of the other places that we're going, and as we're going, as I had mentioned, David, like to do a couple of community comments. And my favorite thing in the beginning is slightly embarrassing Vlad, because as David, Vlad, and I were talking off camera, Vlad has a very popular very popular YouTube channel, Solus PLC. For some of us over here excited about one, we had the custom domain at 100 subscribers. Vlad has 23,500. And I say the only thing that the Manufacturing Hub is missing is a silver play button over Vlad's right shoulder, because every semi-successful regular podcast needs to have someone who is a YouTube star in there. So if you guys have not, please go ahead and subscribe to Solus PLC. On YouTube, it is the push to 50,000 and then the push to the silver play button, which we were all
Thanks, Dave.
I do my best, Vlad. I do my best, and plus I get to embarrass you, once a week about it. So that's always a positive. So a couple of other comments. As you guys have heard us talk about the last few weeks, Preston Hadley is running another Change Your Life giveaway. It runs through the entirety of September, so he's drawing October 1st. This is pretty cool. It's got a Siemens S7 1500 PLC. It's got the S210 servo kit. Vlad's holding them up for anyone watching in real time. It's got the S210 servo kit, and it's got the TIA portal software. And so as part of that, Vlad is also putting out a weekly video on Solus PLC.
That's right.
If you guys want to go check that out, he's kind of going through the whole kit. I think it's honestly, it's very cool. And kind of the one comment I'll make, other than you guys should go sign up for that, is Preston's goal behind all of the Change Your Life giveaways, as he's talked about the last couple of times he's come on, is he wants to give a younger engineer an opportunity to be able to use this. So if you're mid-end career and can afford to buy all the fancy toys like David over here, and I'm sure we'll talk about some of the toys and the things he's convinced me to buy for work, as we get further into this, please send it to someone else who is more in need. Beyond that, as we mentioned last week, Copia Automation is sponsoring this theme. I'm going to go ahead, drop a link to those guys. We'll talk about them a little bit more. And they've got a special free trial. If you guys want to try out what they are using, guys, you can go ahead and click the link. Beyond that, we are live on manufacturinghub.live. And we have a podcast coming out on Thursday. And I think we're going to be more regular, releasing on Thursdays from this point on. With that said, Vlad, do you have anything else before we kick off?
I don't know, Dave. I really like the announcements.
Thank you. I do like 90% of my talking in the announcements, then Vlad has to take over to answer some questions. But no,
you got to do all the hard work. He's got all the subscribers, right? We'll also just say we knew him when he had only 24K. We were on there back in those days. That's what we'll say someday soon.
Absolutely. So everyone, please welcome to Manufacturing Hub with me, Dave, and this guy down here, Vlad. We have somehow made it to episode 29, and this week we have a very special guest, David Nichols of Loupe. David, welcome to the show. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thanks for your time, David. So as we always begin, we definitely want to get an introduction out of you. How did you get started in manufacturing? You're running your own company, so very curious to dive into some questions around that. How did you get to where you are today?
Okay, so I will explain to you all of the lucky breaks and hard work and other combinations of things that led me to be here and be doing what I'm doing. So I guess like I'm the CEO of Loupe now, and we founded the company in 2007, which is a long time ago now. That's almost 15 years ago. And I've got some gray hair in my beard, but that's like, I'm still pretty young. That was like, I think I was 25. So how in the hell did that happen is a question I ask myself sometimes. So how it happened was the sort of the rough outline of the story was I was a controls engineer coming out of college. I went to University of Illinois, and they have a really awesome department. At the time, it was called general engineering. Now it's called industrial and systems engineering, which is kind of I don't know, to me in a good way, kind of like all the misfits and, other combinations of people hang out there, because, controls is, mechanical, electrical, software. Each of those departments have their own buildings and colleges. And it's just like, well, what happens if you want to just like mix those together?
You don't know what you want to do at the end of the day, right? You're trying to absorb all the knowledge.
Or you don't want to pick. You're like, it's like everything, and it turns out controls engineering is like checks a lot of those boxes. And anyway, the department's really cool. And I was like, when I was coming up and when I kind of stumbled into that, it was like, I'd had some exposure to software. I was like really interested in software, but also like building things, mechanical things. And the idea that you could like write some software and like hit enter and your code runs and like something happens. That was just like, that hooked me right away. And so working with a lot of controls engineers and kind of having that as a specialty, came out. I ended up getting a job for a small company, like a small high-tech automation distributor that was based in the Pacific Northwest. They were called Pacmation. Like, shout out to all the Pacmation alumni, because it was maybe 20 people in those times, 15, 20 people who were all just like now legendary probably. But some of them are out here. Anyway, like we were selling stuff like Galil, motion controllers, and Danaher, and Rails and Gearbox, just typical, I say typical, like that kind of like high-tech automation distributor, line card, salespeople. But we were, like their whole thing was like, everybody here who sells has an engineering degree, like we all like know a ton of the stuff. We're like high tech, right? Because we're doing motion control, et cetera. And so some of that stuff was like working with like a motion controller, like a Galil, where it's like SH, servo here, like this kind of like 2-letter scripting thing. And not long into that job, like, again, I was only 25 when we did this, like they started working with B&R Industrial Automation, which they came across or kind of came into contact with in the industry as like something that was really cool for them. And I was hooked on that stuff right away, because all those other products are great. Again, love scripting, love machines, love controls engineering. But then this IDE, well, this looks like a software engineering tool. This like not only has ladder, but also has like a C compiler built into it.
Why was it B&R specifically? Because I noticed, I guess, at Loupe now, you value them quite a bit as an OEM, right? And you're using B&R products up to this date. And I was, just curious why they had selected at that time B&R specifically as their control system.
Well, so I should clarify, because our website's not clear enough, but like we're the channel partner for them. And the company I was working for was the distributor for B&R in the Northwest. And it was our job to like sell the product, right? Like we, some companies go through market directly. But we were the channel partner, right? We were the distributor. So we were selling B&R, like we were the B&R salespeople for the Northwest, Northern California. So I was an apps engineer. It was our job to like sell their product in the territory. We would work with them really closely, but like we were their reps, right? So we were selling B&R. So long story short, that company ended up getting acquired by Mineric. Ended up getting acquired by Command later. Like they kind of went that whole path. But like that day basically where that acquisition happened, it was like, well, what's going to happen with B&R? Because like I was like super geeking out on B&R, loved the like little tiny bit of business that we had at that time. And I was like, this is the idea of like continuing to work with B&R was like way more appealing to me than like just going into this big organization that, was like very different, like culturally than even Pacmation in terms of their mentality. And I was like, well, and knowing people at B&R, they were like, well, if you want to start something up, like we'll support you and you could be the distributor for us. And again, in retrospect, I'm like, how desperate must they have been that they would give they'd be like, and maybe they thought like I thought at the time, like, hey, if this blows up or doesn't work in a year or two, like I'll just go get a better job. Basically, I have nothing to lose. So like that was how we started the company, was basically to be a B&R channel, be the B&R distributor for the West Coast. And it was me and my business partner, Carl Robach, who still like leads our concept team today. And so like, it's really our job to sell and promote B&R, which is why you see that from us. Like we use it on stuff like, but our clients are often OEMs. Our clients are people that are using the technology. And we're saying like, we can help you revolutionize things and solve these problems with, B&R is a big component of that, because their stuff is great. And it's really been their whole thing has been just like really innovative, so, for their whole histories. And that's why it was appealing to us in the first place.
Gotcha. Before we dive deeper, I guess, into the company operations, I'm curious, if you remember, what was your education in controls like at that time? What kind of systems were you taught, in college? Was it, you probably know what's, being taught now. So was it different? Was there a lot more emphasis on, some of the older technologies? Again, I graduated 10 years, almost 10 years after you. So is there a contrast, obviously, not just on the technical side, but also what was being taught?
Well, what was being taught at Illinois, and I think probably still is, University of Illinois is this like big, prestigious engineering research institution. So like the idea that they would even mention a manufacturer name is like unthinkable. Like we don't talk about we're only teach you like equations, we're going to teach you the fundamentals. Like we're going to teach you like really how does PID work. I didn't know what a Rockwell PLC was when I graduated. I didn't know any of this. I had zero industry knowledge, because that's just like, we're going to teach you the important fundamentals about, digital controls, state space controls, mechatronics. Like, let me tell you what encoder, like I had like a very strong fundamentals, and we were writing we were using some stuff but we were like writing C code that was on embedded DSPs.
Gotcha.
There wasn't really a connection to like manufacturing technology or, like all this stuff. I had to learn all this stuff way later, like I never even understood that there were like out of the box products that did this stuff. Right. Because it was just like a lot of those controls engineers and other stuff are like making control systems for fighter jets and stuff. And it's just like, there aren't suppliers, or like, so no, it was more theoretical, more like, we had some like sample stuff, but it was all like very board level and very, very kind of fundamentals about controls and, some really powerful stuff. But not expressed via anything like you have on your wall.
Gotcha. So I guess
I'd never heard of before. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no. So that makes sense. I actually had a similar experience. That's why I asked. But I guess it means that you had to learn or get up to speed pretty quickly at your first employer. Just like many people do. Okay.
Yeah. And when they're like, here's a motion controller, I was like, oh, you can just buy one of these. You don't have to write all the algorithms from scratch like we did in our labs. Like, it's like, no, this is, this will just solves a practical problem. It's a product, and it makes a servo motor run, that was like, I was like, oh, okay, cool. I get it. Like, so we help people make machines, and yeah, cool. Yeah, that makes sense. And that's how I got into it. Just like just basically geeking out about like how cool this stuff was to work on.
Yeah, no, for sure. And what do you guys do at Loupe today? Fast forward those very, I guess, complex 15 years when you got started. What are you guys doing today? What are you working on? What's your maybe main service line that you provide?
Yeah. So it really, the core of the company is unchanged. I mean, we went through a lot of changes, including like renaming the company, rebranding, but really the essence of this company has been the same from the beginning, which is like really passionate about innovation, revolutionizing things, like bringing new technology to a problem to like unlock some new way of doing things. Like that's really what that's what's in our hearts. That's what we're excited about. And that's why we were attracted to P&Rs, like, because they kind of have that mentality too. And like people that use that often have that mentality, or like drawn into this for the same reason, because you're not using it because it's what other people do, clearly. Like, it's like this tiny player. So why would you use some little Austrian controller? Oh, by the way, $1 billion revenue, but like no one's heard of it, right? Like it's this weird thing. So like that's been the passion. So talk about, we're coming from a distribution background, right? And that was like, we just copied that business model. Like, oh, I guess we sell parts to be engineers and help people. Like that's how we'll make money, because we'll just sell the parts. And yeah, that's been the core of our company. And then like over the years, we're like helping people, like working in all different, on the West Coast industries, like semiconductor machines, aerospace equipment, packaging, like wood cutting, metal cutting, water jet cutting, like all these like intense motion heavy kind of like intense controls OEM kind of applications, where what we were doing with B&R stuff was really valuable to the machines. It was really valuable to like unlocking some new possibilities. Like those were the opportunities that we found ourselves in, or we developed. And over the years got really good at developing on B&R, got really good at being a development team in general for equipment on often like very prototype stuff, right? Like first of its kind ever equipment. Mm-hmm. That's something that like is a pretty intense process. And we built this team that was like really good at that. So then we kind of like started positioning that and like offering that as like, we also do basically controls development, software integration, often for B&R systems. And so like, if you think of us as a business, we're like distributor, like selling parts, like B&R parts mostly, but also like ABB and Boston Dynamics and like a bunch of other stuff that doesn't make it on the website. And then like engineering services. So like this like controls SI. So a lot of our projects are control software development, like doing stuff in sprints and like basically project by project, mostly helping people do like product development. It feels a lot like product development or prototyping, because often it's like, how can we make the first version's product work at all? Like that's really the challenge for us. So that's how you can think of us. And then we have like a lot of other weird projects in the works, like anyway, some of them aren't ready for prime time, but that, if you think about us as a business, that's how we can afford to buy all the cool stuff that we buy.
But would you say, I guess, like, because motion, I think, like, you know, you've mentioned that a couple of times, but motion, I feel, is a very I would say challenging aspect of automation in general, right? Like even if you do like traditional PLC programming, I think you can specialize in motion, and there's guys that have 20, 30 years focusing on that like core competency alone. Would you say that that's maybe where you guys add like the most value? Because you said that the hardware was maybe above and beyond some of the other platforms, or is it, you know, do you do a bit of everything?
No, you're right to pick up on that. Like and a couple of things I'll mention, like one thing that was cool and kind of like now everybody positions themselves this way, but like early on, like 2004, 2005, B&R was like, we have a single platform that's your HMI, your PLC, your motion controller. It's already all integrated together. It all works great together already. You don't have to do any of this like glue, you know, you don't have to stitch all this stuff together. Like that was like something that was really cool about it. And they were really strong at motion control, right? Like really strong, like not just like the drives, but also like the software elements, you know, like different CNC, being able to like do stuff in the real-time control or the PLC side that's coordinating these like 20 hours of like intense motion process. Like all the big bottlers like Sidel, KHS, Crohn's, like if you look at those giant turret bottlers, like you open the cabinet and like you'll find like big racks of orange servo drives, because like the motion control performance and the motion control, like what you can do with that stuff is like really, really awesome. So yes, that's definitely a specialty motion side. And then software, you know, bringing software engineering, which is I think why I ended up in a DevOps theme episode, was like bringing software engineering into that context, you know, and in these motion heavy machines is something that we are like, I think are have some pretty special skill about.
Yeah, that's very interesting, you know, and I guess I don't have as much of a, I would say I've done motion controls applications, but I don't have maybe the knowledge of the history. So I'd be wondering if, you know, some of these, I would say, like lesser known brands are pioneering some of these applications, and then the bigger ones are sort of following suit on the, you know, on the features and how the performance is being driven in the market. I'd be very curious to kind of know that. I don't know if you have any answer or I guess knowledge of how those platforms evolve, but it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, and it was, I mean, you know, I didn't think of it this way because like I kind of came in at kind of this era, but like motion control, again, I'm coming in right out of school, like working with this platform where everything's already integrated together. But motion control is always this other thing, right? Like you use a motion controller for that. Like it's not, you know, it's not a one thing. It's not like you put things. It's not like the PLC to do different things. Like, and then there's these servos over here, like, and that was more like our legacy, or where we had come from, like from the company that we were in, right? Because we were in like kind of this like high-tech motion control distributor company. Now I think it's more like these big platforms are just like subsumed motion control into what they do, right? Whether that's Rockwell or Siemens or whoever, they're like, they all have a story about how they're like integrating this as a portion of their machine controls. Right. Like, I mean, I would argue, and obviously, you know, like from my point of view, like B&R has been really, really good at that. And they were like decades ahead of like people with that idea. So I think like some of what they do and some of how they've grown and developed all that product and platform in-house is really, you can see it like in the product, like it really makes a difference. It's not like it's been stitched together, you know, it's been really thought of from the ground up to work well together. And again, there's a lot of performance and other things that come from that are really important, you know, and where people appreciate it, like there's really loyal B&R customers, for that.
Yeah. That makes sense. I definitely, you know, should do a bit more research on B&R personally. Like, as you said, I've seen them in very large machines, fillers, packers. So
yeah,
something, I guess, to pay more attention to. But Dave, I want to give you an opportunity also to ask a question before we get too technical and go on this like very controls heavy tangent.
You guys drive. I'll go wherever you want to go. You want me to ask a question? or no, you, Dave. Sorry, I'm Dave too. Sorry.
No,
We have this issue at Loupe as well. There's several of us. Go ahead, man.
it happens. It happens. No, so I think that it's a very interesting journey that you were describing with the Loupe team, with BNR. I guess kind of some of my first earliest memories of BNR, 2010, 2011-ish, they were kind of the strange Austrian controls group that, as you mentioned, billion-dollar revenue that no one knows about. I know that we talk to a lot of people, and I think that we work, and there are a lot of people that watch, of smaller companies kind of looking to bring their product into market. So how can you kind of describe the process that you went, or maybe you and BNR went, to go and kind of bring knowledge, can you kind of describe what the process looks like?
Yeah, like how do you bring something like that into a marketplace where no one's heard of you?
Exactly.
Right. I mean, I think it's really, really not easy, first of all. Like, and also I would say even today, like I'm not really I don't hold back much criticism about BNR even being able to like describe what they do and what they're about. Because again, when we talked the other day, it was like, are they just like a new inexpensive player compared to the incumbents? And you're like, no, they're like actually the most badass in terms of performance anywhere. Like that's why we like it, right? So it's like, I was basically like, my attitude back in that day back at that time and still was just like, I don't care if nobody's heard of it. First of all, like I can see what's possible with this stuff, and I'm excited about it, right? Like I'm an evangelist in that sense. Like I'm a believer in it in that way. And like, it might take a really long time, and we've been at it for a long time and we've got a lot more work to do, but like, that was like, first and foremost, like this stuff is revolutionary. Like, and when we would talk to people, like now I'm much better at describing that. Now I'm much better at explaining that. Now I'm much better at understanding when I'm talking to people, like I might be excited about how we could revolutionize their machine, but that's not their attitude or mentality. Like that's not even why their company is successful. It's for some other reasons, right? Like, which is fine. Back then I was like, it's wrong that people don't use the best stuff. It's way more fire breathing, way more evangelical. So like, but the point would be like really so to more directly answer your question, really being clear about what is the purpose, what are you about, why, who's the right fit for you as a company, and really being like super clear about it. Because there's an element where you could say like, well, anybody who's ever bought a PLC should be a BNR customer. And there's people that are at BNR that I have arguments with about where they're like, that's true, sort of, technically maybe, but like, it's not for everybody, and the reason that that's a problem is because like, if that's the way you're positioning yourself, then like, you don't really know who it's for. The people where it's really a solid fit and like where nothing else would do it, like they don't hear that, they don't understand it. So like, if you look at Loupe now, we talk about like revolution, we talk about innovation, like that's just like, that's what it's about for us. If that's what you're about, like all in, like we're all in, it's a fit. People that see that just out of the corner of their eye, they're like, yes, that's what I want. And because we're really clear about it. But if we were like, yeah, if also you have some kind of average or, like if it's just whatever, we'll do it. Or like you're trying to do it because of cost reasons, like, okay, that's valid, but like, that's not why we're here. So like, I would just say like being really clear about your purpose and who you are and who your product is for. Like, honestly, that's the part that's really hard to do. Cause I feel like they feel like they're leaving out parts of the market. They're limiting the parts of market that they would address, right. But actually the opposite is true. Like you just like hammer on what you're about and then go take over that other stuff later. But like, it needs to be really clear what you stand for. Right. And so I saw that with BNR, and now I can actually say it more clearly. Now, like I can hold that up and be like, "This is who it's for," and then it's obvious, right? Then it's like it's not even. There's no convincing to do because like the people that are into it are like drawn in like a magnet versus running over and chasing all over the place or trying to pound on cold calls and get into places that don't want to talk to you, right? Because like it'd be like, "Who are you? Don't know. Who's your product? Don't know. Who's you're like, but trust me, it's so good. It's better than it." And it's just like it's really hard that's a hard way to go.
I love that. And you made a comment, and I think it's the number one thing that resonated with me on your website is, you guys founded Loupe to start a revolution. Can you tell us a little bit about the thought process of that, as well as, some of the tools that you guys are using to create this revolution?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, a big theme. So one of the parts of the story I left off as far as like when we started Loupe was like the context of that was like I graduated college, I moved to San Francisco, so I was living in the Bay Area, I lived in the Bay Area for 10 years. I didn't just live in the Bay Area. I lived in the middle of San Francisco for 10 years. Like during the founding of the company. And like, if you were, to be in there from like 2005 until 2015, like if you just like go down, if you just like, never mind automation, never mind anything, if you just like look at the companies that were founded and you look at what happened there at that time, it's like mind boggling, right? Like Facebook didn't exist like when I moved there. And then you're just like looking around being like, wow, it looks like there's some really powerful, amazing technology around here, which is all like software industry. It's the internet. It's like all this like, at the time cutting edge, but like really, really powerful, impactful stuff about like, wow, this is really amazing. Like this can really change things. And kind of like just soaking that all up. I mean, we were still like here working on our little machine, our little backwater of automation, like just working on machines that we thought were cool while these like, $1 trillion companies were sprouting up. But like, we were just like soaking all that stuff up about like, oh, there's techniques that these companies use, like almost as survival techniques, or there's just like really powerful tools that they've come up with, or like, user interfaces are made out of HTML and JavaScript and CSS that's like being invented. And there's like billions and trillions of dollars being poured into the development of that technology. And you're like, and it's just sitting around and it's basically free. Yep. Right. And it's just like, how come, so like a big observation, or sort of like you're sitting here being like, am I taking crazy pills? It's like, I see the obvious application of all this technology into these industries just because we like this industry. We love this industry. We want to be, we want to make machines. This is the stuff that we're like really passionate about, but like, how do we get all this stuff into machines? So like, there's lots of examples of that, software engineering is an example, like, B&R stuff is an example of that in many ways, because it's very software inspired. There's just, techniques and how you think about engineering, how you think about development, how you think about like the fact that you're developing software, right? Like that's a thing that I think is still a debate, among a lot of equipment builders or PLC people. It's like, is it software? Are you a software engineer if you program PLCs? Like, I think the most like biggest flame war I ever started was when I asked that question on LinkedIn, and there's just like 20,000 people like arguing about whether it's true or not. It's like, give me a break.
Well, let me ask you this.
So
I guess like,
does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah. I definitely agree with you, but I want to maybe get some, I would say like less obvious benefits of DevOps in control systems specifically, right? So again, let's take some very basic examples of, let's say, improving productivity, reducing time of development, whatever. But what do you like? Are you collaborating more? Do you see, let's say, more applications engineers working on the same program that otherwise wouldn't be possible? Are you seeing, I don't know, like remote access being facilitated, and you're sending your files to GitHub, so that actually prevents more loss of downtime? Like, are you, I guess, like driving towards all those like actual solutions?
Yeah. And in fact, I feel like recently kind of emerged from this like evolutionary, like this like lost evolutionary chain that we've been off of here, like kind of on our own. And then we come back and we were like, so everybody uses Git, right? And they're like, what? No one knows what I'm talking about? Like literally no one? Like, so just to give example, talk about DevOps, like I was asking somebody on my team, like getting ready to talk to you guys about this. And I was like, when did we start the company GitHub account? And it was in 2011, which is 11 years ago, right? Like, and it's like, yeah, okay. Because again, at the time, and even today, an automation studio project is a bunch of text files in a folder structure. It's not XML. It's not a bunch of weird binaries. Like, it looks exactly like Git would expect it to, because it's a piece of software, right? Any project, right? And we were like, yeah, cool. Just throw it in. We had used SVN or whatever. Like, we definitely should GitHub. So that was like 2011. And we're like, this seems important and we need to get into this. And like, yeah, it turns out like today, if you took, like, we would die if you took that tool away, right? So first of all, that's like, how productive, how important is it? Like, or what's the productivity? To give some like nuts and bolts examples, like we have project and okay, a couple more points of statistics. We have a client project net right now that has 9,000 commits in it. In terms of like, and that's like over the last handful of years, there have been 9,000 change sets made to that piece of software for one to few machines that we're working on, right? And our company like internal libraries, like our Loupe internal libraries project, where we develop like a lot of the shared libraries that we use, has 5,000 commits in it of just like shared code, shared libraries. We made an error collector system. We made a state management system. We made an alarm system. that like are in most of the projects that we work on, like have dependency, use those libraries. We would never touch that again. And those sets of libraries are so battle hardened that like they've seen everything, right? Like they've had like 10 of our best people for a decade, like honing like what exactly should happen when, like how should a piece of application code throw an error and then record it and then catch the response and then do the recovery. Like every single one of those pieces that are like fundamental patterns in machine design, like we have like thousands of commits against, and we use that every time. So it's just like we lever so hard on that. And I was, when I was watching the episode from a week ago or so, it's like, yeah, even in the same facility, different programmers have different styles, all different. Like it's like PLC programming, even when I did it, or even when I was coming up, was still basically a one-man show, every machine. And if you needed to have two people work on it, often you're like, let's split the machine into two PLCs so that they don't go on top of each other, because otherwise like their commits would interfere. We need to have this checkout process. Like nowadays when we're working on stuff, like we can have 5 people contributing to the same part of the code on the same PLC at the same time. And it's no problem. Like that's what Git was built for. So I guess to talk a little bit more about that, like we also use a lot of simulators. Like B&R has like an insanely good simulator, including like motion and networking and like all this stuff you just run on your laptop. Mm-hmm. And so we would have like 5 people working on one machine before the mechanical design was even finished, right? Because like typical process, like mechanical team works on it, electrical team works on it, then they throw it to the software team. These 2 teams have already blown their dates and you have 2 weeks to ship it writing the code on site. Like, tell me if you've heard that. Like, that's like basically standard practice as far as I've seen it, even among us. And we're like, we need to, and if you want to have equipment that's like sophisticated in terms of software, like leaning really heavily on software, like you can't afford to do a heavy, intense software project like under the gun with 2 weeks to go. It's just impossible. So you gotta like start early, work on all this stuff in the simulators with 5 people on it at the same time, so that finally when the electrical team's finished and you're ready for checkout, throw the software on it, ship it, right? Like that's basically like, it happens every single time. Like, how does nobody notice the pattern?
I mean, hopefully there's a couple of days to test it, but yeah, that's definitely.
Yeah, but I mean, the 2 weeks they give you after they blow their dates, then you can then you obviously still got to test it. And again, there's plenty to do during commissioning too, but like there's a lot more to do if you show up with blank, with nothing. I don't know, did I answer the DevOps question though? Because like so much of DevOps is like the tools that enable that kind of collaboration, right? Like Git, build servers. Like I could talk more specifically, but that's why like it's more of a survival technique than like an ROI kind of thing for us.
No, absolutely. So I love that. I'd like to get a little bit further into that, but it feels like you're almost talking to, the enlightened people of we should absolutely use DevOps tools. So what would you say to kind of all of those people out there that have never considered Git, never considered having multiple engineers working on a project, never consider starting PLC programming until the thing is built and you've got 8 whole days in order to program the entire system and check out before we need to run live? What is your thoughts to them?
Well, I want to be really careful, and I'll give a shout out to Bradley, who may be watching, that he's given me feedback and keeping me on track when he's basically like, be careful about the us versus them. Yeah. Be careful about coming across as like being arrogant because you have some futuristic techniques. Is be like, okay, but like seriously, there's a really valuable like, and not even like I'm doing it better, because I also know what it's like to like live on site on the folding table, or like if you're lucky and not putting your laptop on a trash can so that you can get the thing to ship, or you had to fly back there so been there, like know that, right? Like this isn't some like fancy kind of way of operating. And so I think it's just about, there are ways, and a lot of our motivation came from just like, there are ways to be more humane, to like to have it be less crazy, to have it to be less intense. Like there's so many people that are rightfully proud that they'll be like, I'll go live on site for 8 weeks straight to make it happen. And they do it. And like, it's amazing that they can do that. Right. But there's a lot of, in my opinion, kind of like unnecessary suffering that's taking place when it's like, it's all on that one person. They're away from their family. They're working 60, 80-hour weeks. It's like if two people could work on that PLC at the same time, like what's that going to do to the workload?
Yep.
Right? Like what's that going to do to the experience? Like what's that going to do to people's career trajectory in terms of like, not everybody can do that, and not everybody can or should suffer to that degree, either because they don't have the ability or it's just ridiculous. It'd be like, I'll go do something else.
Yep.
I don't need to do this, right? Like, so it's like, but again, I don't know, like, and the puzzle is kind of like culturally, where does it come from? Like, I'd look at these again, I'm looking over at these other companies like, wow, they're shipping 10,000 updates to their sites per day, or they're shipping like, they're even, never mind 10,000 per day. They're shipping updates to their code base every day. How in the hell do you do that? Like, we would work for 9 months to get one release going, because they're like, that's, you only get one shot at it, right? Like, and these are things where it's just like, it's really valuable to customers. It's really valuable to the end users to be like, oh yeah, let me just tap. You got a bug fix? Like, oh yeah, I can see that reproduced in my simulator. Let me make a quick commit here, hit that, it goes out to the machine. It's like, I didn't have to get on an airplane. If it doesn't work, if it doesn't work or we screwed it up, we'll roll it back, or we'll do another commit to fix it. Like, these are things that customers really appreciate, right? And again, it's not to take anything away from the road warriors that are just like, I'll fly in there tomorrow and I'll fix it, because that's like, I have a ton of respect for that too. It's just like, do we need to do that every time? Like, is that really necessary? Like, or, what about being at home? Like, what about seeing your family? Like, that's pretty valuable too. So
I would say, to your point, there's a lot less people who are quote unquote road warriors versus the ones who are burnt out, by the industry and that kind of a lifestyle. I think we're certainly not doing a great service to, I would say, younger engineers who are looking to get into manufacturing, that quickly realize how difficult it really is, from like a travel standpoint, from I would say, like pressure. And again, you do have those very tight, I would say, timelines where you do have to make sure that everything's working. So by just giving them the ability to not only test, but I guess like develop beforehand in a, I would say, logical manner is a big opportunity to change the industry. And I really like, like you've mentioned a lot of companies in the Silicon Valley earlier on. I think, for better or for worse, because there's also a debate to be had if they change the aspects in a good or bad way, but that's a separate discussion. But I think they certainly changed the world from what it was at that point in time, right? Like that's
well, I'd say it's the cause and effect, on the world is still up for debate, but like the degree to which they have refined the practice of software engineering is unquestionable. Like, just like they're doing it at such a high level. Like, I was joking with Dave. I was like, some of these it's like so hard to see the difference in the dynamics, to have kind of like a foot in both worlds, because you're like, if you didn't use these techniques in a job in software engineering, like you would lose your job like right away. Like you would be fired, right?
I
like,
think if you were asked if you know what Git is at an interview and you said like, I have no idea, then like there's almost like a zero chance.
Right. Yep. So you run software engineering and you have 20, it's just like, again, it's like hard to say that without being like, people feel like defensive or critical about it. It's just like, it's really important or really valuable. Like it's really a great tool. And again, it doesn't take anything away from somebody's ability to like get on an airplane and go knock out a problem. I know that feeling because I've done it. Like I've drive 4-5 hours to the customer, sit down, be like, what's the problem? They're like, it does this. I was like, oh, you need to change this, and this. And then like 30 minutes later, I'm back in my car driving home. I'm like, no one else could have figured that out in the world. Right. Like that feeling, that like adrenaline of that is like so amazing. Right. But it's like, also I sat in my car for 9 hours, so that I could do that. So again, it's the teamwork aspects, the humanity aspects, and just like, if you're really thinking of it like a CEO, even if you're like super cold-blooded about it, you're like, get the product to market faster, respond to customer requirements faster, this kind of like turning and being agile to be able to like do better than your competitors in terms of being more competitive in the marketplace. Like these DevOps tools were created to allow that, right? They're created to make that possible. So that's another motivation.
No, absolutely. And to your point, David, and what Vlad was talking about, I feel my first foray into, DevOps and software engineering was, how can we potentially bring the next generation of engineers in? How can we get through the through the issue of you're going to bring in a really bright engineer. They're going to be interested in the industry. You're going to put them on the road 60, 78 hours a week, 4 out of 5 weeks, or 5 out of 10 weeks, or I guess 9 out of 10 weeks. And then 6 months later, they're going to be gone and they're going to go somewhere else. And we lose entire, generations of talent because they're not interested in grinding it out. And that was even before COVID. And now with COVID, many of us can't go on customer sites, right? We have to find ways to do this remotely. So I think that this is going to continue to be a bigger push. And to your point, why don't we build libraries? Why don't we build reusable libraries? I think that the people who agree with us are going to be shaking their heads yes. And there will be many other people who would shake their head absolutely no. I had one of those conversations earlier in the week that they love finding new ways to build similar things. And it's a different challenge. It's a different challenge to build something that's absolutely bulletproof and use it 1,000 times as it is to build something incrementally better, a dozen times. And I think that those are two sides of the same coin that we must look at moving forward.
I mean, one point I want to make on teamwork too, like one of the things that we talk about at Loupe, because we have like some incredibly skilled people on our team, and here's a rule that we have about it is like, there's nobody that's so good that their code doesn't get reviewed. Mm-hmm. Right. Like there's nobody that's so good that and some of our some of the best automation software engineering people in the world that are on our team, I'd be like, you need to run that by so-and-so. And when they get together, every single time it's better.
Yep.
Right. And so it's just that's another argument. Be it's not taking anything away from somebody's ability to be if you talk to somebody else, even if they're junior, even if they're because a lot of times juniors are this doesn't make any sense to me why you did this. And you're like, oh, right. I'm the mastermind here, but my code just got better because the junior engineer noticed something obvious and asked a stupid question. Mm-hmm. Because we were doing code review, right? And where does code review come from? It comes from the practice of software engineering, because again, in software engineering, it's more about, it's really about survival, right? They're building things that are so complex. How do we even do this and not die? That's what most of these tools come from, or most of these techniques come from. And I feel like there's the same kind of benefit. How do we bring that to automation? It's really, really important.
Yeah, no, I would certainly agree. We have a good question as well as a comment in the chat. So Chris said that he's streaming this on his flight right now, so I'm assuming he's either going to or flying from an automation site. And I mean, again, that's the reality, right? As we said, you get these many hours on site, and then you quote unquote relax on the flight back home. Or
you must
whatever.
Be going too, because you never get to leave, right? So you must be
on the Wednesday.
Way there. Yeah, go ahead, Vlad. Sorry.
And then the question is, so it's an awesome invention, but what about vulnerability to attack? And I'm guessing this is more pertaining to cybersecurity. What are your thoughts on, as we move forward with some of these tools, do you think that the manufacturing industry in general is ready for the cybersecurity risks? And maybe how does your team handle those potential attacks? Because as you know, there have been multiple customer sites that have been hacked, I think, in the last as recent as a few months. And there's also, I would say, published or very known vulnerabilities in some of these manufacturing platforms that have not been, I would say, patched. So maybe it's moving a little bit slower than the traditional software industry. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a rhetorical question, but it's where do you feel safer, in a place where they can ship an update and it's on every device within 24 hours, or a place where something will never get updated because nobody knows what's on it, nobody can touch it, it's been 9 months since it's ever seen a software update? Those are the places that are just sitting ducks, frankly. I mean, I feel in terms of speed and agility, and these tools are actually security enhancing. Because again, the same thing happened this week with was it 14.8 with iOS, where it's hey, this exploit went out and it's update done, right? Yep. That does not happen with PLCs, right? And it that's because of the limitations of a lot of these systems that were never meant, or they're not just technical limitations, they're also cultural and the way that things are administered. It's impossible to update them. Right. And so I feel security comes from having as good of an understanding of the best, and having all the bug fixes and all the security fixes. If you use tools like Node, And again, there's a lot of Node-RED people out there in the PLC world, and you do like npm check-in, whatever. It's like there's 5 security vulnerabilities in the dependencies that you have, or do you want us to update to the latest? Yes, right? Like there's nothing like that in the PLC world, right? There's like, oh, we're on version 16, and we can't go to 18 because this hardware, it's just like so yeah, I would make the strong argument that systems that can get updated frequently are going to be in a better position to be hardened and have the latest stuff, because those attacks are coming, and they're, the stuff that's just sitting there and not having been updated for 2-3 years is stuff that's most vulnerable.
Yeah, I think it's going to be
Absolutely.
interesting to see if there's going to be maybe jobs in the controls that will tie into like more cybersecurity type of an area. Dave, what do you think?
I was going to say, I completely agree. And to kind of the earlier points, the entire world runs on software, and the entirety of software engineering runs on Git. Git is built and pushes, I would imagine, every single, major update of every single device people are currently watching us on. So the inherent vulnerabilities, I would imagine, are reduced and kind of spread throughout the entirety of software engineering. And the fact that more eyes, and probably the best paid eyes in the world, are going to be watching these vulnerabilities are going to provide automation and the manufacturing world a better series of lines of defenses, in addition to being able to push with known vulnerabilities, as David was talking about. And I do want to get into a little bit of Agile. I want to talk about the ship in 6 that these guys
Yes.
at Loupe have recently gone out. But first, I have an ad read to do, Vlad. Can you give me the same awkward laugh you gave me last time when I asked for a sound? Perfect. Thank
So
you.
sweet.
That's our new ad read sound. It was ad hoc last week, but no. So DevOps in industrial automation is brought to us by Copy Automation. They deliver modern developer tools for industrial automation. Let us know if this sounds familiar to the last 2 hours that we've been talking with David and Adam before. So this is built for automation and controls engineers, and Copia's flagship offering provides Git-based source control for PLC programming. Functionality is going to include version control, change visibility, and collaboration designed to streamline how industrial machines are commissioned and operated, resulting in faster delivery and maximized uptime. And if you guys are watching this live or listening on the podcast, there will be a link where you guys can go ahead and check out their free trial offering. They've got a really quick onboard time. If the stuff we have talked about is not something you are currently using, you should check that out. Perfect. Thank you. And so I want to talk about the ship in 6 mantra that you guys use, David, and how that relates to agile software development and how that kind of relates to everything we've been talking about. So can you tell us about your ship in 6 mantra and what it is for you guys, please?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess just a little point of history. And again, back to sort of, I've been at the folding table. My laptop's been on the trash can. Like, I've worked on multi-thousand-hour fixed bid control software development projects, plenty of them. And what I noticed about them from trying to specify them, like usually with like 50-page Word documents that have 8 levels of headings. I'm sorry if you're writing one of those or reading one of those right now, if you're out there, was that it was like really, really difficult to build new things via that method, where you take that spec, you put this, big multi-month chunk of, fixed, we will definitely deliver exactly what what this says by this day for this amount of money. And then getting 2 or 3 weeks in and realizing, oh, now that we're building it, we notice this. Now that we're building it, we notice that. Actually, a lot of the premises and assumptions about this are wrong. It's a good, and there's no amount of like doubling or safety factor that can really protect against the downside of like what it feels like when you're in those projects that turn into death march. Yep. And again, everybody's nodding their head because they're like, yep, been there. And so one of the things that I found really frustrating, or you'd hear people talk about it, be like, we built them exactly what they asked for in the specification. Now they want something different. It's like, yes, because now it's obvious what it should be based on what we learned from building it. And that's a valid way to feel. It's a valid way to be like, oh, no, now I see. Like, we need to try these things because we needed to work with the prototype to learn that. Right. And so instead of having this kind of head in the sand mentality of like, let's try to make a fixed bid project that's going to incorporate all that uncertainty, like, let's build it step by step. Like, let's build it, bit by bit. Like, we kind of got the big idea in mind. Let's build the first piece. What do we think of it? Okay, like, do we need to build that again, or do we need to come back? Again, I'm just basically, again, aping things that are just completely understood as common practice in software engineering, because they know like building step by step is a good way to like build the correct product. Number one, the correct product is built in actually the least amount of time, without that kind of suffering and change order and all that other bullshit and suffering that goes along with that. Like, it works really well. Like, it works really well to build things that way. And we knew that from building things other ways. And I want to give some appreciation to some of the first people where we said, we kind of want to make this, and we're just going to be fixed time, like 6 weeks, exactly 6 weeks. We're kind of going to get into it, and then we're going to get out, and then we're going to have, and we're not promising what we're delivering at the end. And they were like, so we're promising to give you this much money, and you're not, like the scope is flexible. You're like, yeah, exactly. And like, it turns out that's actually a really good way to do it.
Yeah.
Like, and there's a lot of like foundation and research and practice of people that have been building sophisticated things in this way.
Mhm.
A lot of software is built in this way. And so we sort of took that and thought about how can we apply that to automation. And, we had talked about Basecamp, and Basecamp has been a big, inspiration of our company in terms of like their thought around process and how are things built? How should your company work? And Ryan Singer wrote a book. He started to extract like, how do they build things at Basecamp? And he extracted that into basically this series of videos in a book called Shape Up, where he talked about like they build things in 6-week sprints. And there's a lot of interesting details, and like it's related to Agile software development. That's another, like, if you're unfamiliar with any of these kind of like iterative processes, like Agile is also a great place to start and great place to get involved. There's a lot of like knowledge out there and like just training that you can get about like how to do this. And that's we sort of started to sort of inch our way over, and at a certain point just like made the full shift. We're going to do everything this way because of how well it works, both for us and for our customers and the people that we work with.
David, could you maybe give a little bit
yeah.
more context on what Basecamp is for those who are not familiar with the process?
Sure. Basecamp is a company. They used to be called 37 Signals. They made these web tools. They're one of these web 2.0 companies. And like what I would highlight is they were very like, they had like a kind of like a rock and roll kind of attitude. Like, a big part of their marketing was them just like talking smack about everything, about like how companies should be run. And that was really inspiring to me. They built, like, as a company, a project management software called Basecamp that like helps people do this kind of thing. But like what I was always like taking from them was more of like inspirational, philosophical, like, here's how you should run a company, here's how you should develop product. They would use that to market their own products, right? And so we used some of their stuff over the years, but basically like they were big. They did a lot of this like content marketing, like having a point of view and like being really opinionated about everything, and kind of inserting themselves and stuff in that way, which again was often very, very awesome of them to do. So that's kind of that's my note card for Basecamp. The guy that invented Rails was the technical co-founder there, and Jason Fried was the CEO. And yeah, they've gotten into some trouble recently that I wasn't too happy about. But anyway, like they're a cool company. They were a big inspiration for a long time. And yeah, we took that model and from Ryan Singer and like basically outright lovingly stole it and kind of modified it to a client service context about how can we bring this kind of, we do everything with sprints to, and work on behalf of our clients. And there's some complexities and differences about how it works versus doing internal development, but it's really powerful. And so much so that like the controls integrator within Loupe, we actually named it Ship in 6 because like the process is so important to what we do.
No, absolutely. I love that. I remember the first time that I transitioned to running a project with that Agile framework. And give a shout out to John, who is almost certainly not listening, but John like sat down and explained it to me, and he explained it to me, and he answered all of my ridiculous questions about like, what is an epic and how do we define this? And we went through it, and I'm like, John, why haven't I been doing this my entire life? And so for me, it was one of those, we should always use some sort of format in this for exactly the same reasons you described, David. It significantly reduces kind of stress of a 2,000-hour fixed bid project, or we're going to commit to delivering this in 18 months when you know going in that you're a multiple of what you think the thing's going to cost, because you have no idea what this monster is going to turn into. And no one in the company knows how to say no, or you bid it super lean because you know you're going to make all of your money on change orders, which for me never sat right with the type of projects I like to do. So picking a period of time, whether it be 6 weeks or a series of 1 week sprints, and putting the people that you need to be able to have the staff so that you can actually deliver a project and it has usable and value, it is useful and has
Yes.
value,
Yes.
is
At every
the
step.
most
Yeah.
yes, is the most important thing to me. And so I've done it in a variety of flavors, but it's always good to hear people talking about Agile. And I know there are a couple of integrators that kind of work in that form, fashion, and function, but to your point, I feel like more of us need to do it. I don't want to say it should always 100% be the industry standard. I have never seen a waterfall project work well when you compare it to how we could have built it in Agile.
And again, it's delicate because it's like I can sort of already hear some of the reaction because and the kind of, there's reasons that it needs to be done that way, which I respect, and where there's possibilities, or where there's exploration, or where it's like, try it sometime, try it for a piece, try wherever you are in that process of learning about it. If it's curious or interesting to you, or you notice any sort of symptoms that we're talking about, like just try it out on some side project, try it out on some, we tried it out on some stuff where it was really obvious, where it was it was totally experimental what needed to get done. So it was not possible to make a spec for it. You're like, good, try sprint there. Cause no one will blame you for not being able to specify it was, and where we got our start on that was really experimental stuff where we kind of want to make this, we want to work on it for 6 weeks, and then we'll come back and give you a demo. And that was easy to, that was a natural fit for that kind of project structure, but it works well as you kind of get some skill set around that. It's not easy to do. There's a lot about scoping and how much to take on. It's a tricky practice to learn, but it's really, really valuable and really a lot of fun. And one thing I'll note too, that I realized recently was a 6-week sprint, 2-week sprint, it really limits the downside on both, right? Because the project blows up, it's done in 6 weeks, right? And you're everybody's you step on a landmine, no one saw it coming, all you lose is 6 weeks, right? Whether that's the client, whether that's you, and you're out, you're hey, look, no hard feelings, project's done. We can either reset or we can just go ways, but that's the longest death march you would have, right? Which is and that's protection to both sides.
No,
I like that
absolutely.
approach.
So I typically do a lot of assessments and those things of upfront work to get a better idea of what the scope looks like before going into implementation.
Oh, totally. That's super important. Maybe more important. Right?
Those are all lessons that are hard learned, and many sleepless nights, lots of hair pulled. Hopefully not nearly as many, 9-hour drives one way to get on a customer site for a 30-minute fix, to turn around and drive back 9 hours to bring it back to the beginning. But these are all kind of hard fought lessons, but they will in the end save you a lot of time and make your end users much happier. And probably you're gonna upset less controls engineers that will up and leave because they don't want to deal with the customer, month 18 of a 6-week project.
And all the best controls engineers will want to come work for your company because you don't 100%. Abuse them in that way, which is, if you can't make a good business out of that, I don't know what to do for you.
Absolutely. So I've got one more question before we start to wrap up, and I apologize because it's been such a great conversation, and we will undoubtedly go over on time as we do nearly every week, as Vlad will attest. But can we talk a little bit about brand? So you mentioned that you guys have spent a bunch of time branding Loupe as who you are. And I think over the last 4 or 5 years, that is kind of when you and I connected, and is one of the first things that I kind of realized from you. And as I alluded to in the beginning, have probably spent an insane amount of money through your unboxing videos. But can you tell us about the process of you guys going through branding and getting me to spend a lot of money on the stuff you've unboxed?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd say other more company history, we took a really hard, we were really ambitious and we really cared a lot about what we're doing. We were passionate. So we're I guess if we want to grow sales, we need to take this intensely heavy sales approach. And we invested a ton in that. And the people that I was working with at the time, still one of my favorite people ever. Love this guy. But we had nothing in terms of the communication assets, right? I have a totally different understanding now of what is the job of sales versus marketing. At the time, there was all these things that I'm talking about articulating ideas about innovation and revolution. We didn't have any of that dialed at that time. We would just go in and we would just freestyle talk in a conference room for 2 hours, and people would be what were those guys talking about? I don't know, but they were really enthusiastic. That was all we had at that time. And then working a bit with professional communicators, they and I got to give a shout out to Kinesis, who I love, and they've helped us rebrand the company. They've taught us so much, almost everything we know about marketing and branding. They took all those ideas and like crystallize into one word, or they can take that and crystallize into a set of core values. That's true, right? They're extracting that from our passion, our knowledge, everything we know about why we're here, all that company purpose. And they're like, did you mean revolution? I was like, how did you do that? Like, that's exactly what I mean. Like, and now I'm like, now I just go and stamp that on everything, and like, it makes sense. Right. And so that's the power of like a professional communicator's brand, is to be able to like, again, they didn't wrap that on the outside of us, right? That was inside. They were just able to bring it out and be like, this is what you mean. Right. And it was like, I don't know how you did that. Right. But it's, that's a skill. That's what it means to make a powerful brand. And then when you know that, you go around and be like, oh, cool, we're passionate and excited about new technology. We should make unbox videos just because we're excited about unboxing new gear, right? Yeah. Like, it's like, that was very intuitive, but it makes sense in that framework, right? It makes sense about, that's why we're here. We love the newest gear. Like, we want to see, like, these are all about new possibilities, right? That's why we're attracted to BNR in the first place. So like, unbox video makes sense in that marketing context, even though we're like, at this point, like unboxing Festool and like just buying rent, like just getting stuff that we think is cool. But other times it's like an ABB robot, or other times it's like this amazing 3D camera that we're playing with. Like, and those are things that are like, are totally brand compatible. They fit with our company's purpose, and they're entertaining and fun to make and fun to watch, and like, people appreciate them. So like, that's way more fun than like banging on cold calls where no one knows what you're talking about. Right. So yeah, that's been really powerful. And I love this topic, especially in industrial automation, because like a lot of these things, as we've been talking about, kind of feel like they're stuck in the 90s. And now there's like a lot of powerful tools to just like, that are just lying around, such as brand.
Absolutely. No, I love what you guys are doing. Sometimes I can't watch the videos because I then go out and see how much the stuff costs. And then it's like, it's only $500, right? Like, I can find a use for this thing. And
you need to make a YouTube series like I did. That was my excuse. This is for my work. I need this for my job.
I'm gonna try to convince Beth when we're done that I should just make another YouTube series, and it's worth me accumulating all of this stuff. I feel like I know how it's gonna go, but I will report.
Makes sense to me.
It makes sense. Yes.
Just send her the playlist from Loupe, and then she can get it.
Maybe it'll be a series of reaction videos that I'll send to you from her.
There you go.
We'll start with the $80,000 robot, and then it's all less expensive.
Anchor point. Good idea.
Absolutely. But no, so perfect. I appreciate it, David. So I like to joke that this is our unsponsored Audible segment, in which I ask you for a book recommendation, and Vlad goes and immediately downloads it for his his weekly Audible download. But I know you talked about it a little bit before. Can you give us a book recommendation, please?
Yes. I got to recommend Shape Up. I talked about it as like one of the biggest inspirations directly to our engineering process and our development processes. And that's at basecamp.com/shapeup, no hyphens or anything. And you can read the PDF for free. You can get a hard copy. We give it to every new hire, and like, it's super important to what we do. And if any of these Agile or software development are like really thinking deeply about like, how do you make new things? Shape Up is a great place to start.
Absolutely. No, I appreciate it. And I like all of the I enjoy all of the Basecamp, books that they've put out from remote work, that it's crazy to think was back in 2008.
Yeah, totally.
Through. I've read a series of them, and I cannot more highly recommend them if you're thinking about getting into the remote work or the software engineering side of the industrial automation. And then my last question that I have for you, David, is, we talked a lot about the amazing things that you guys are doing at Loupe, but, who should reach out to you? Either, customers or prospective employees, who should reach out to you guys?
Yeah, I think one thing we became really comfortable with as we were working with Kinesis, talking about brand, is just really owning, like, this is what we're about, right? Like, we're not trying to convince anybody. We're not going to apologize. We're not going to apologize about it. We're just like, respectfully, like, this is what we're here for. Like, and that's talking about like innovation, revolutionizing things. Like, I've got this idea, and I have a sense of what's possible. I want to try things. Like, anybody that has a mentality, whether that's like an engineer that's interested in working for Loupe, clients or OEMs or equipment builders that like aspire to do that, or like have that attitude themselves, like those peers. Like, if we're peers in that way, like, we need to hang out. Like, I don't care how, like, let's get on a Zoom, come visit us, like, talk to us, follow us on LinkedIn, like that kind of mentality. And we put that in our hiring videos too. Just like, if you're down with these big ideas and that sounds cool to you, like, let's find a way to work together somehow. And so, yeah, I would say the best place to do that is on our LinkedIn, Loupe's LinkedIn. is really where like the most of our stuff is put out, and the place to follow along. So maybe some of those 24,000 followers can go over to Loupe's little 1,600 and make it bigger. So we'll be happy to meet you.
But be careful. They put out unboxing videos and you want to buy the stuff.
Yeah. It's
But
good.
Yes, only follow the Loupe LinkedIn if you want to see a bunch of really cool stuff unboxed and a bunch of, this generation and next generation ideas being talked about. If you don't fall into those buckets, you may want to go check out something else.
Yeah, and I'll add too, like I didn't mention this, but we're kind of like I'm less militant. I'm out of the convincing business. Like if this sounds cool to you, like let's hang out and do it. Like I'm not trying to change anybody's mind, or like if this sounds horrifying to you, like I totally get it. Like let's not try to, we can agree to disagree, like respect. Like, but there's enough people out there that kind of share that mentality that like those are the people that we'll work with, and
Absolutely.
our company will be whatever it'll be based on that crew.
Yeah, I love that. So Vlad, but before we wrap up and I ask people to rate us on all the podcast platforms, did you have any other questions for David?
I certainly did, but I think I gave you
You'll have to come back. Yes.
Gave you a bit more opportunity to ask your questions, Dave, this time. So I think it was a really good conversation. I want to give a shout out to Sean Terrell, who had recommended you, David, to come on this on the podcast, and thank you again for speaking with us, and obviously thank everybody that's tuned in. Yes. And as Dave mentioned, we will be posting the episode also on all the normal podcast media. And Dave, if you want to give your usual spiel, please go ahead.
We're semi-professional. We've done this now 29 times, so we need to ask you guys to rate us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, because that means something, and to give us the thumbs up and comment and subscribe to wherever you guys are watching. Vlad and I love doing this. We love being able to have guests on like David and find awesome sponsors like Copia. So if you guys like what we're doing, please share a little bit of love, and be sure to interact with us in all of those other places. Until next week, we'll talk to you guys soon.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks,
everybody.
David.
Thank you.